All right, so welcome everyone, and thank you so much for joining us for our discussion today on promoting student wellness in the online classroom. So we're really excited to see so many colleagues here that are passionate about supporting our students during these difficult times. So if you haven't done so already, please use the link if you can to sign in and introduce yourself to the group. Tell us a little bit about what you're doing to support your own wellness this summer. I think Brian shared the link in the chat. And next. Megan introduced us. So I'm Karen Jensen. I'm at the University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign, and I'm joined with three of my wonderful colleagues here, Molly Goldstein, Holly Glucky, and Brian Helmke. So just really briefly, we used our first 5 minutes here getting set up. And again, thank you to Megan and the invitation to have this discussion with you all today. So again, we're hoping that you can sign in and introduce yourselves to us, and then we'll talk about some guidelines for our discussion today. And then we're going to introduce some recommendations based on research for supporting student wellness, and then we'll be creating some breakout rooms to discuss some challenges and solutions that you all have experienced and that solutions that you have from teaching online this past spring. And then we'll collaborate together using a shared platform, and then we'll regroup to discuss these outcomes of the small group discussions.
Hi, I'm Brian Helmke from University of Virginia. I thought we would start with guidelines for discussion today in our small groups. I'd like to note that the first 3 of these on these lists are derived from a class that I taught this spring that the students wrote together. And that's a way to give students in the class agency to help determine what they want their discussion community to look like. We did this through a Slido function where students wrote ideas and then upvoted the ones they liked, and then we put it together. I'll give you just a second to read through these. And for those of you that have small phone screens or small text showing up, the guidelines are to commit to learning, not debating, listen to understand, don't listen to respond. Be open-minded, don't be afraid to ask questions. Critique ideas, not individuals. Step up, then step back. In other words, contribute your ideas, then allow everyone's voice to be heard. Use I statements, don't speak for others. And finally, what is said stays, what is learned leaves. Don't repeat specific conversations or names, but feel free to share your own learning after the workshop.
All right, thanks, Brian. Our topic today, as far as promoting student wellness, is motivated by the fact that in recent years, higher education has been grappling with what many have referred to as what we call the campus mental health crisis, where we have alarming numbers of students reporting very high levels of stress, anxiety, and depression. And some recent work has shown that this crisis is particularly acute in engineering programs, and that might be exacerbated by the narrative of engineering students who work really long hours at the expense of sleep and their social lives with poor self-care, even being celebrated or made into a joke like this meme, or the follow-up meme that suggests that engineering students need to sacrifice self-care and social lives to be successful in engineering. So of course, the introduction of COVID-19 into this landscape has been projected to create an unprecedented mental health burden on our students, given that countless stressors have been added to the students' daily lives. So things from the abrupt changes we experienced in spring 2020 to switch to online learning, financial hardship, sick family members, among many others. So some of the early studies that have been done on the impact of COVID-19 on student mental health is very alarming. So one study found that 25% of students were experiencing anxiety. Another study found that 83% of students felt the pandemic worsened their mental health conditions. And yet another study found that nearly 41% of students were experiencing depression, and 30.5% indicating that their mental health during the pandemic impaired their academic work.
So there we gave you some broader statistics, and we wanted to kind of start the discussion with a student voice. So I'm going to read a quote from an undergraduate student. I feel that this department has a lot of issues with mental health. I know a lot of students who are constantly overwhelmed with schoolwork, including myself. A little bit of stress at times is normal and healthy, but it's different when that stress becomes anxiety, and that prevents you from living your life normally. The engineering courses can be so brutally rigorous, and I feel that there's no sympathy for students at all. The college is failing to address these mental health issues to the degree that they should be. They should be constantly reaching out to students, letting them know that the resources available to them, that there are resources available to them through hard mental times. The college should show that they care for the well-being of the students a little more. So as Karen mentioned, you're going to be, you could go to the next slide, Molly. As Karen mentioned, you're going to be going into breakout rooms to discuss the challenges and potential solutions for supporting wellness in our students in an online classroom. So to start the discussion, we wanted to give you 5 categories to start to think about. So those categories may include wellness resources and activities. This could include introducing mindfulness in class, something that Karen and I are actually have done and are doing in the next semesters. Syllabus statements that can be either developed by students or by faculty or departments to give students the resources that they need. Other categories could include communication and transparency within the course, interactions between faculty, students, and now being at home, students' families, identifying and addressing stressors, and how can we model wellness ourselves for our students. So these are 5 categories that we have come up with, and we welcome you to dive into each of these categories and work within them, or potentially you can find new categories that you think would be helpful and useful to the group and to students.
So we're going to encourage you and use breakout rooms to look at small group discussions. First, in your small groups, after we break up, we'd like short introductions. So whatever you can say in one breath to say who you are to the group. And then choose one team member to take notes in Jamboard. If you haven't used Jamboard before, it's another nice collaborative tool. And the link is in that tiny URL that you can click. And we're going to use that so that we can all be working within these same boards. In these, you're going to discuss challenges you've observed for your students' mental health and wellness. And then one of the next boards is discussing these possible solutions. And then we'll have another board to talk about ASE. So I'm going to go to that. And making sure everybody can see my Jamboard team. Okay, great. So it looks like a lot of you have joined. And Brian, can you put the link in the chat in case anybody didn't grab that? Thank you. So this is the first Jamboard, these challenges that you've observed. You can go over here and click sticky note and you can add different colors. We want to see what your team thinks as some of these challenges. If you go in the upper right here, you can click to the next board. So we're going to start thinking about some different solutions. And you can really easily toggle back and forth between these if you're thinking of a particular solution that goes to a problem, or if you're coming up with a solution before some problem. So you're welcome to do those in any order. And then our third slide is how can ASE support student and instructor wellness during remote and blended learning? So I think you will be getting placed in your breakout room shortly.
Great. Well, thanks everyone for these great discussions and participating on the Jamboards here. There's a lot of really great things for us to think about, and also for solutions that people are sharing that from their teaching this spring and what they plan to do this fall. So we're going to spend a couple minutes just to having the facilitators kind of summarize the challenges, solutions, and ASWE boards, and then we want to open this up to the larger group discussion. So Holly, are you here?
Yeah, I can take the challenges board. So I guess as you can all see, there are no shortage of challenges that we're facing, both students and faculty and staff. So I was able to kind of summarize a few things that were common that I was seeing on this board. So the first 2 are issues that the students are challenging that impact their life inside the classroom, but also outside the classroom. So the first thing I noticed was the Black Lives Matter movement and students' involvement with that movement and grappling with all of those challenges. And also international students and the threats to their visa status are two things that came up on the board. Also, we saw connectivity issues, students accessing Zoom classes that faculty maybe design on their computers, or accessing them on their phone, the challenges those may bring. Home stressors, things that are going on with family at home, feeling uncomfortable turning on their cameras. And with regard to mental health, so students having access to counseling, being willing to voice the issues that they're facing is a challenge that you all saw. The loss of peer-to-peer interactions, and that goes to this idea of students who were struggling previously, who were maybe relying on peers to be able to study, or other challenges. Once they move to an online classroom, it becomes even more challenging. And lastly, the thing that I thought would be good for us to discuss is faculty feeling ill-equipped to support students in these capacities. And you'll notice the colors. I think afterwards, maybe we'll try to group the challenges by color, and to make it a little bit easier when we send this doc out.
So I can talk just for a couple of minutes about trends in the many solutions that are posted here. I'm going to drop a couple of links in the chat that might be useful to guide our discussion, and we'll also add this to our resources page at the end. The first is that there are several themes that are encompassed by a framework for accessibility called Universal Design for Learning, UDL. And UDL is a way of thinking about designing the teaching space or the learning environment to provide multiple ways of engagement, of representation, and of action and expression. So a number of ideas appear on this board about providing flexibility in the interaction among students, with different kinds of hours available for interaction, different kinds of contact methods, whether it's email, text, Twitter, however you communicate with your students. Also, multiple ways and times to access the course content. Links by email before class, if it's a synchronous taught class, or other ways for the students to interact with different kinds of content, audio, visual, PDF, whatever. But it's also worth noting that too many options is also a stressor in terms of cognitive load. So we want to limit the kinds or the numbers of ways that we interact with the students. And then finally, flexibility in terms of assessment. Maybe de-emphasize the traditional timed exam in this environment and focus more on flexible grading, maybe specifications or standards type grading, or grading contracts, or other ways for students to have some agency in the effort and the kinds of assessments that they want to interact with. The second link that I've dropped in the chat is to a framework that's called Community of Inquiry. This is a framework that grew out of teaching computer science in an online environment, and so has lots of good hints for online teaching. One aspect of this framework is called social presence, and that is the kinds of interaction among students and also between students and instructors to create the learning environment is critically important. So a number of themes that appeared on the solutions board about modeling our own struggles or sharing our own insecurities can sometimes be useful to students to normalize the stress and help them feel like they belong in that environment. Now, as an aside, of course, we have to be aware of our own social identities that we have in that space, so that we can reflect ahead of time about what ideas and things we're comfortable sharing. It's also really important to be transparent with students. What are the expectations? What are the ways to interact? How will the class or the teaching and learning space work? The final theme that appeared on this board was around mindfulness. One suggestion was mini meditation sessions. For example, I do a thing in my class where before each exam, we have a mindfulness moment where we just put things aside, close screens, pause, and take a minute to regroup and get ourselves into a space where we're ready to go to work, either on the class or on the exam. Also, it might be useful to have conversations in class and give some time to the kinds of stressors that students are experiencing. Again, to create that community of sharing and belonging among the students. Help the students feel seen and like they belong in that classroom.
Great. And I will say, while you were all in your breakout rooms, it was really exciting for us to see how generative you were with your ideas, and us needing to create second boards for not just the challenges, but the solutions. So that really kind of leads really well into how can ASE support student and instructor wellness during remote and blended learning. I was seeing a couple of different categories, and one of the first was workshops and conversations, much like this one, because as we start putting our collective heads together, our ideas are really great to be able to share and bounce off of each other. And it's one of the reasons we wanted to set our discussion up like this, instead of us being the experts in this, getting to learn from all of you and all of us learn from each other. Another theme that we see here is sharing resources, Toolkit. And we have started this. And so we have a resources document that I'll show, and I believe Brian or Karen will put in the chat. And I'll let Karen talk through this shortly. I'll go back to it again, but we do have a resources document that we're working on and we'll keep adding to. Another one is, best practices synthesized. So again, of not just our experimental, what we're doing right now, but hearing what people have done in the classroom and hearing from research and having this put into something that's digestible and 1- and 2-page formats that's really practitioner focused. And then also acknowledging ASE's leadership role in this for continuing and bringing this conversation forefront, so that we understand that these are issues that our students are facing, so that engineering administration from institution to institution understand how important this is, to providing this environment that this is something that we collectively as engineering educators care about. This also leads really well into Megan talking about some fall programming. So ASCE is looking for ideas of things that are important to all of us upcoming for this next semester, and people who'd be interested in leading some of these conversations. I don't know if there's anything at this point you want to say to that in addition, Megan, or...
Oh, that's good. So I just dropped a link in the chat, and we invite all submissions. So just like this session, it can be highly discussion based, or you can certainly share your work and research, but we're looking for interactive kinds of workshops. So thanks for the pitch. Appreciate it.
And I'm going to go into our resources document and show that and let Karen talk through this a little bit.
Great, thanks, Molly. So again, we've created, and this is just a starting point. So a lot of people have told us that they would really like to see resources compiled for thinking about student wellness and mental health. So we have this document, again, that we're going to share after the workshop as well, because we're hoping that others in this workshop can also contribute to this resource sheet. So the first is an upcoming ASWE webinar on student support. And this is based off of some NSF-funded research that was done this spring during COVID. So we encourage everyone to check out this webinar. And then we have some website resources that have some different information and studies and best practices for people to use in working with students and for general health and well-being that they could share with your students. And some different organizations such as Mental Health America and Young Minds. Young Minds and the Healthy Mind Study, those are two of the larger national studies on student mental health, and have recently done some work on the COVID pandemic. And then a few people had mentioned that the syllabus statements, they wanted to see some examples of that. So we compiled, this is a list of some an article about using a mental health statement in your syllabus, and then also some example statements from other institutions who share them publicly that you could look at as an example or use. And we've also compiled a list of news and other opinion articles about student mental health during the COVID crisis and online learning. And those are here as well to check out. And then one of those at the end is the Anemone app. This is a student-developed app for students to manage their mental health, and particularly in times of crisis. It's a free app for students, again, developed by a student at the University of Illinois. And mindfulness was another topic that we saw a lot. We have a list of mindfulness resources, including some people mentioned some apps. So we had some different apps that you can look at. A lot of these have free or reduced costs for students. And then we also have a list of, these are 2 papers that I've talked about using mindfulness strategies with engineering students that you can check out. And then finally, a broader list of literature on mindfulness courses and class activities that were compiled by undergraduate Isabel Miller, who studies mindfulness for students. And then finally, at the end, we're asking all of our participants today to share other items that they think are useful for participants in this space. So please add resources here and right now and after the workshop. And our plan is to both synthesize the Jamboards from today's session and compile all of this with this resource sheet and make that available to all the participants today to share all of the ideas that were discussed across all of the discussion groups. With that, and I think we have a couple minutes maybe for if people want to jump in and share anything from their groups in particular they'd like to share with the larger group, either by unmuting your mic or posting something in the chat. And otherwise, that's the end of the content we have today, but we'd like to hang on for a few minutes and see if people want to share other items from their breakout rooms, either in the chat or by unmuting.
Hi, my name's Sarah. I'm a graduate student. I just want to share one of the things that I think would be super impactful is like understanding the culture that pursues engineering. And as faculty and teachers, I feel that something that's super helpful is, at least like as a graduate student, but also as a student, just to know and normalize that this chaos is happening for everyone. And so I think like even if it's like a 2-minute, the beginning of the first class, just admitting and accepting like, hey, this is the world we're in. I am also struggling personally with this. It's been a difficult adjustment. I'm not going to be on my game every class, but I look forward to working through that with everyone. So just also like acknowledging like we're humans first and that we're all sharing in this collective chaos right now. And although it's affecting us differently, that we can at least all be on that same level going forward.
This is Cindy from University of Washington. That is such a good point, Sarah. And I ended up adopting an idea that somebody in my department, Mitchell Fajaro, came up with, and that was asking students, and I did it at the beginning of every class, to choose a symbol in a Google slide of where they were in a hope, despair, stress, calm grid. And then later in the quarter, I added energy as well. And at the beginning of every class, students put a symbol on the plot where they were. So as a teacher, and all of us could see where we were. And over time, you could see we started to get to hope. And then by the end of the quarter, we were back to despair. And it was really validating for all of us to just see where everybody was. And I have a slide from that. If I'll put in the chat or get to organizers so you can see what that looked like. But students said that they really appreciated that faculty actually cared. And that was their top takeaway, was that the teacher cared enough to ask. And so it was really useful.
Great, thank you, Cindy.
There's a question in the chat about using humor, and I don't know if anyone has any thoughts about that, using humor to lighten the mood and de-stress.
I'll share one thing I do in one of my heavier classes. Heavy means biotransport, so lots of math, lots of math content. I build into the class every day a joke of the day, and I give the students agency to bring the jokes. And in other words, I assign them each a day to bring jokes. And the only rule is it can't be a joke that gets me fired. And of course, that gets tested every semester. There's always one that I have to pretend not to laugh at. But it works well both to give a break in the flow of the class. If you're planning the ups and downs of the intensity of your class, that's important also for managing the cognitive load. And it has even gotten to the point where if I forget one day, the students call me on it and make sure that we don't forget.
So I know we're right up to time here, and I know other people have to log into other meetings and move on with their day, but I know that we wanted to hang out for a few minutes if anyone wants to keep this conversation, but I did want to turn over to Megan for a second to wrap us up, but we'll hang on the line if people want to continue these conversations.
Thanks so much. So again, appreciate the pause. We do have sessions, like I said, running through the middle of August. And so I invite you to join us next week. Next week, the topic is going to be on universal design for learning, which is something that's kind of come up here in this conversation. And that's going to be led by Dr. Alicia Strong-Saminsky, Dr. Sarah Spence-Adams, and Adva Waran Uwat. I'm sure I said that incorrectly. And so hopefully you'll be able to join us then. And we've, again, got a great set of sessions coming up. And so I encourage you to register, and I'll turn it back over to the facilitators to continue with this conversation if they are able. Well, let me also add, so once I get this recording done, I will add it to the website, and I will also add all the links that they've shared on the same page that you click to register. You'll be able to find these resources for forever. I do have a little bit of a backlog in getting those done, but I promise to get them done and uploaded sometime this month.
Thanks for joining, everyone.
Thanks so much, everyone. Appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So Brian, I have a question on the jokes. So, you know, humor is not always culturally normed across, you know, all different cultures. Have you had any issues sort of managing that?
You know, I've been super lucky. I haven't. Part of it, I think, is that I work kind of hard in the first day or two of class to set the standard. So the standard for the quality of joke is really low, first of all. There's no pressure to go find one that's actually funny. And it sort of started when my son was still in 3rd grade, so I could always just blame him. You know, and then I have had cases where I make it totally voluntary. So even I tell them, even though I put your name on a joke, you know, on a day, you know, if you forget, if you don't have one, if you don't feel like doing it, oh, well, I have plenty of extras. And you heard how cheesy mine are. So if you want a funny one, you have to bring it. So, you know, so, and then usually it has happened where a student will ask not to be assigned to a day, or, you know, and it always happens where students, for whatever reason, just say, yeah, I didn't do that. Okay. And I just say, oh, okay, fine. It was just for fun. I have one. We're good. So I think, you know, it's a lot that I try to be purposeful about how I control that interaction. Also, it's not just wide open. So I think that's part of why I've been really lucky, because I sort of go into the first day of class thinking it's like a foreign language class, right? If you walk into a foreign language class and the professor comes in speaking English and reading the syllabus to you, then you're not getting a feel for what the tone of the class is.
Yeah.
And so on the first day of class, I come in with the attitude that we're speaking the language, we're doing what we do every day, I'm modeling what it's going to look like, and now you know what to expect and what your expectations